When you are struggling with grief, there is one thing that is going to help you over everything else. Hey there, my friends, and welcome back to The Renewed Mind. I am your host, Ashley Varner, and today I want to talk to you about the one thing that is going to help you whenever you are struggling with grief and loss during the holidays, but really anytime. And I'm just going to jump right into it because I feel like this truth is the one thing that really helped me to heal and to move forward after the loss of my father. So if you don't know, about 2 years ago, I lost my dad unexpectedly. He was pretty young. And over the last 2 years, I've been on a journey of grief and loss and more grief and more loss and healing and really just discovering the difference between whenever you're dealing with loss as a believer and a non-believer. So I put all of the things that I've learned into my book, Not Without Hope. You can pick it up on Amazon. It is an ebook version, an audiobook, or a paperback like this. But what it does is it's written specifically to believers, Christians who are dealing with grief, who maybe you've heard things like the joy of the Lord is your strength, and you don't know if it's right to grieve, or maybe you're grieving and you don't know how to really align that with your faith. We're going to talk about it a little bit today, but if you want to dive deeper, make sure that you pick up a copy of the book. So the number one thing that helped me in my grief and healing journey was leaning on the Lord during my times of grief. Now, you might think that that's something really simple, but it's easy whenever you're dealing with grief to want to lean away from everyone, right? Not just the people around you, but from your Heavenly Father too. And I definitely experienced some of this in my earthly relationships where I kind of pulled away from people for a season, but I definitely didn't do that with the Lord, and I am so thankful that I had that foundation with Him where I wanted to lean into Him. Part of that probably is because my earthly father was such a great example to me of my Heavenly Father, and so that was always my go-to response. If something was hard, I was leaning into my dad, right? And so I was leaning into my Heavenly Father. Grief can cloud our vision. And so it's important for us to look back at God's faithfulness to help us and solidify our current faith situation. Because right now we're kind of in this season of the in-between. We're in between here and heaven. And so whenever we're living in that, we have to remember God's faithfulness over everything else. When we look back and remember what He's done for us, who He's been in the past, it helps us have so much hope about what He's going to do in the future. Lamentations chapter 3 verses 22 and 23 say, "Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed. His compassions never fail." I love that verse because it reminds me that He's the reason why I was able to make it. And I don't know about you, if you're in a season right now of grief and of loss, I remember the nights where I would lay down every night and say, I don't have anything left, God. Thank you. You gave me everything that I needed for today, but I literally don't have anything left. I gave everything that I could, and I only had so much bandwidth for what I could do each day. Now, if you've watched plenty of my past videos, you know that I'm someone who likes to plan. I'm someone who likes to have things all figured out and have things planned way in advance and taking care of things way in advance. And that was not the season I was in during this time. And during the first, I would say about 6 months after my father passed away, I was literally in a place where it was day to day. And if you're in that place right now, I want you to have hope that, one, there's nothing wrong with that. God says that He gives us mercies and they're new every morning. But secondly, I want you to know that it won't always be that way. There's going to be a time whenever the fog kind of lifts and it's still going to be painful and there's still going to be grief that happens, but that fog that's there isn't going to last forever. So today I want to share with you 3 ways that you can focus on God's faithfulness, specifically during times of grief. The first is to reflect on your past testimony or the testimonies of other people. So you may be saying, Ashley, I don't really have a lot of examples that I can just think of in my life where God has been faithful. Now they're there, but maybe you're not at a place where you can really see them. I want you to lean on the testimonies and the examples of other people. Lately, I've been reading a book about Susanna Wesley. She was the mother of two very famously known preachers, and her life was marked by grief and loss. And she is such an example to me. Her testimony is such an example to me that I think that you can do the same thing. You can find people around you, maybe people in your life, maybe me, maybe biographies that you can read of other believers who leaned on God's faithfulness as a response to their grief. And that is something that is going to help carry you through. Another thing that you can do is to keep a faith journal. This is something that is very helpful whether you want to do it on a digital notebook or you want to have handwritten pencil and paper. Maybe you just want to write it in the notes app of your phone. I want you to use this journal to write down all the ways that you see God working in your life. It doesn't have to be big things, it can be small things, but what I want you to do is start centering your focus on the things that God is doing for you. We've all heard the idea that whatever you focus on is what you start seeing, right? So if you are interested in getting a specific kind of car, all of a sudden that car, you start seeing it everywhere. It's not that the car wasn't around before, it's just you weren't focused on seeing it. The same thing is true whenever you're making a faith journal. You want to look for all the ways that God is being faithful to you. Now, I can give you tons of examples of this. Even in the weeks and months prior to my father passing, now looking back, I can see and my family can see how God was so faithful to us. It was like God knew that it was going to hurt us so much that my dad was leaving, so he wanted to make sure that we had these little gifts throughout the year and the months before he died. So one of those examples, and something that I think back on very fondly now, is about 2 weeks before my dad passed away. In the middle of the day, I happened to be home, and at this time that wasn't a norm for me. He swung by to drop off some stuff and ended up just sitting down for about an hour and a half, and we just chatted. For some reason, the kids weren't there. I don't remember where they were. Maybe they were sleeping or the older ones were at school. But I had an hour and a half of time with my dad that was uninterrupted, where we just chatted like friends because we were friends. And so I want you to think back on times like that where you can say, God, I saw you working, and because I know what you were doing and I know your faithfulness and I know your character, I know that you're going to continue to be that same person in the future. Psalm 103 verse 2 says, forget not all his benefits. And that's essentially what we're doing whenever we create a faith journal. We're saying, God, I'm going to put into writing the things that you do for me. I'm going to put into writing the ways that you show up for me. And then I'm going to focus on those. The last way that you can focus on God's faithfulness during this season is by sharing your story. Now, you might not feel comfortable sharing it with everyone, and that is completely understandable. But I want you to know that there's power in putting your grief into words. If you are someone who maybe you're watching this for a friend who's grieving, give them the gift of sitting and listening with them. That is something that they're always going to appreciate and remember, not really expecting anything out of them, but just sitting and listening. People deal with grief different ways, but one thing that I've found, especially for me and my family, is being able to talk about my dad and share stories about my dad has always been healing for me. And maybe one of the reasons why it was so healing for me is because God is woven throughout every part of my dad's story. And even in his death and in the months after, God was woven in through all of it. Now, I understand that grief can be heavy and hard and overwhelming a lot of the time. But I also want to remind you that God has a track record of love and care. And I also want you to remember that he has broad shoulders. God can handle any kind of emotion that you share with him. And so in these seasons of grief, I want you to lean into him. He is faithful. He has proven himself faithful, and you can trust him with your emotions and with your grief. He's not just sitting up in heaven, wandering around and doing all these things. He is in your life. He has his hand on you, and I want you to know, if you hear anything else from this video, I want you to remember that he has a proven track record of love and care for you. And even if we don't understand the reasons why he allows certain griefs into our lives, we can still trust him because of who he is. So I want you to feel free to share your story in the comments, maybe share something about your loved one. This is something, like I said, that can be very healing, especially if you don't feel like you have a physical support system around. Make sure that you just share that in the comments. Again, you can grab my book if you want to go deeper into the process of healing from your grief. This book deals specifically with navigating grief in the light of eternity. So if you want to be able to grieve, but in a way that honors your faith and honors your trust in the Lord, then this is the book that's going to help you do that. All right, I hope that you guys are having a wonderful holiday season, and I will see you guys next time. Have a great week.